With all the stories that I've made till now, you can call this the last of my trilogy. All three stories are very different. It might look the same, but all the three of them are very different from one another when it comes to drama.
In this video, let's break this down logically. Yes, these three films are connected, but not the kind of connection you are expecting. And believe me when I say this, the truth is much more interesting than a simple post-credit cameo. Let us look at the actual math and the specific timelines of these movies. If you pay attention to the dates, a physical crossover simply does not work.
You're goddamn right.
You cannot put Rocky, Deva and Luger in the same room without breaking the logic of the stories. The KGF timeline is very strictly established from the very first movie. Rocky was born in 1951. He arrived in Bombay at the age of 10. That makes the Bombay arrival year 1961. The upcoming movie Dragon is officially set in the year 1967. If Rocky appears in Dragon, he would only be 16 years old. He would just be a teenager trying to survive on the streets of Bombay. He would not be the massive crime boss wearing expensive suits and carrying golden guns. A cameo from a 16-year-old Rocky adds absolutely nothing to the grand scale of Dragon. It would just be a distraction, and even if it features, it won't be Yash appearing on screen. Then we have the story of Salaar.
सुल्तान जो भी चाहे वो उसे ला कर देता था और जो ना चाहे उसे मिटा देता था.
The main events of Salaar take place well after 1985. The childhood portions happen around 1985 and Adya's kidnapping happens in 2017. There is absolutely no overlap between the adult timelines of Salaar and Dragon. The years simply do not line up in any logical way, and knowing how Neel hinges on the drama, the word he uses the most in his interviews, will not risk disturbing the story for fan service cameos. Yash will not walk into the frame during the climax of Dragon. Deva will not suddenly appear to save Rocky. These specific characters and their worlds do not physically collide. Their timelines are completely separate by design. Each protagonist gets to be the absolute center of their own universe without sharing the spotlight. So if they do not share a physical timeline, then what is the connection? The answer comes down to themes and aesthetics. Neel is not building a cinematic universe where characters assemble to fight a giant threat. He is building a thematic trilogy. Think about the classic Sergio Leone films from the 1960s. This is the perfect comparison for what Neel is doing today. Leone directed A Fistful of Dollars, For a Few Dollars More, and The Good, the Bad and the Ugly. Audiences around the world know these as the Dollars Trilogy. Clint Eastwood played the exact same archetype in all three movies. He was the classic tough guy with no name. He wore a poncho and smoked cigars and shot faster than anyone else. The director was the same. The Western genre was the same. The legendary composer Ennio Morricone provided the same exact style of tense music for all three films. But the actual stories did not connect at all. Each film stood completely alone. The characters had different names and different motivations, except for Clint Eastwood's character. You could watch them in any order and it would not change the experience. And Neel is doing the same thing with KGF, Salaar and Dragon. In his trilogy, the commonality is the dark genre and the gritty color palette and the loud music. The worlds are entirely different. The main characters have different names and different backgrounds. The time periods are completely separate, but the look and the feel of these films follow a very clear and intentional pattern. When you watch 30 seconds of any of these movies, you know instantly who directed it. This is a very interesting way to make movies. It gives a director complete freedom to explore their favorite ideas without worrying about strict continuity rules. You can tell a story about ambition in one movie and tell a story about friendship in the next. You can use the same exact visual style to tie them together in the minds of the audience. They echo each other through style and tone rather than plot. They belong together simply because they share the same creative DNA. And one thing predominantly anchors a Prashanth Neel movie is the Neel protagonist.
Trilogy of great characters that you've built around big heroes. Characters who exist a little bit on this side of the shade that we usually don't see big heroes in.
The central character is the absolute foundation of this thematic trilogy. Neel does not write normal heroes. He writes about broken and violent men who operate on the extreme edges of morality. He creates an archetype of the silent and the reluctant god. Both Rocky from KGF and Deva from Salaar are treated as absolute myths by the regular people around them. Neel loves the idea of an unstoppable force of nature who actually speaks very little. He lets the secondary characters do all the talking. They build the myth of the hero by sharing rumors and telling scary stories. By the time the hero finally takes action, the audience already believes he is invincible. Yash spent years building the specific physical presence of Rocky. Prabhas carries the silent giant energy perfectly in Salaar. Now Junior NTR is bringing his own massive physical presence to the screen. In Dragon, Junior NTR is playing a character named Luger. We know from the recent glimpse that Luger is the chief assassin for the Afghan trading company. He operated deep inside the global opium trade during the late 1960s. Neel has already stated in interviews that Luger is the absolute darkest character he has ever written. That is a massive statement coming from the guy who created Rocky and Deva. It means we are dealing with a totally different level of violence. Rocky is driven by raw ambition and human greed. He wants to own everything in the world. Deva is driven entirely by extreme loyalty. He only wants to protect his friend at any cost. Luger seems to be driven by something much darker and colder. The recent teaser shows him as a literal beast who feels absolutely no remorse for his actions. He even says that when he closes his eyes to sleep, he does not see the people he killed. He only sees the enemies who are still alive.
सोते वक्त सपने में उनकी शक्ल नहीं आती जिनको मारा है, सिर्फ उनकी आती है जो अभी तक बचे हैं.
He's a pure predator focused entirely on the next target. This is the connecting tissue of the trilogy. The protagonist is always a physically dominant force who completely rejects normal society. They are feared by everyone they meet. They wear dark colors and carry massive weapons. They let their actions speak for them. Neel is taking this exact same character blueprint and dropping him into 3 completely different environments. First, it was the gold mines, then it was the tribal politics of Khansaar, now it is the opium wars of the 1960s. The character remains a violent myth, but the flavor of the violence changes every single time.
So I will not change it just because somebody comes and tells me that, I've been repetitive in my attempt of storytelling.
This thematic approach perfectly explains why the color palette always feels familiar. People complain that all Neel's movies look exactly the same. They point out the dark grays and the flying coal dust and the stark blood reds. They say he only knows how to shoot scenes at night or inside dusty factories. But this isn't a lack of creativity. It's a highly specific directorial signature. You see the same behavior with major Hollywood directors. A director like Christopher Nolan carries specific visual styles and pacing across completely unconnected stories. Michael Mann loves neon lights and night shoots. Quentin Tarantino loves specific camera angles and excessive blood. Django Unchained and The Hateful Eight look similar on the color scale because the story demands that kind of a setting. We praise these directors for having a distinct visual language, and Neel too has his own signature style. He wants you to feel a very specific sense of dread and tension when you watch his films. He removes bright sunlight and bright colors because he's telling stories about dark and violent people. The environment has to match the mindset of the main character. You can't film a story about ruthless gangsters in bright, beautiful sunshine. By keeping the skies overcast and the rooms filled with smoke, he traps the audience in the same claustrophobic world as the hero. It forces you to focus entirely on the raw emotion of the scene. When everything is grey, the sight of red blood or the bright orange flash of a gunshot hits the eye much harder. He controls where you look by limiting the colors on the screen. And to amplify the violent myth and the visual language, we have to listen to the music, or rather, feel the music. Ravi Basrur doesn't compose traditional background music. He creates massive industrial soundscapes that rattle the speakers in the theater. He uses heavy metallic sounds and aggressive choral chants to build an unbelievable amount of tension. Just like Sergio Leone had Ennio Morricone threading iconic music through his westerns, Neel has Basrur threading heavy metal sounds through his action films. The music isn't just playing in the background, it's an active character in the movie. It tells you exactly how dangerous a hero is before he even throws a punch. You hear the clanking of the iron and the massive drum beats, and you know immediately that something terrible is about to happen to the villains. Basrur builds specific auditory themes for different types of violence. In KGF, the music sounds like a working factory with heavy hammers hitting steel. It reflects the industrial setting of the gold mines. In Salaar, the music feels older and more tribal with deep vocal chants. It perfectly matches the ancient warlord politics of Khansaar. For Dragon, we can expect Basrur to adapt this signature sound to fit the 1960s opium trade. The instruments might change to fit the period, but the core aggression will definitely remain the same. When you combine the dark visuals with this massive sound design, you get the signature Neel experience. You are stepping into his specific imagination every time you buy a ticket. The repetition is the point. It's supposed to feel familiar. He's perfecting a very specific type of cinematic presentation with every new project.
I know that I've got a lot of comments where people said that, he can only make a KGF. he can only make a KGF kind of a movie.
Now let us look past the action and examine the core emotional themes that actually tie these scripts together. Neel builds all his stories on a few very specific emotional foundations. The most obvious and powerful theme is the mother figure. The driving force of KGF is a mother and her incredibly demanding promise. She does not tell her son to be a good person, she tells him to die rich and powerful. That single extreme command drives Rocky to conquer an entire empire. The driving force of Salaar is also a mother, but her motivation is entirely based on fear. She commands her son to hide his true nature. She makes him promise to never fight again. These are two completely opposite commands from two very different mothers, but they both dictate the entire life of the hero. We can absolutely expect Dragon to explore a similarly intense emotional anchor. You can see this right in the teaser with Rukmani Vasan's character. She's shown holding a baby. It looks exactly like classic Madonnine child imagery. She's even reading from the book of Genesis. In a movie filled with opium wars and assassins, we have a character embodying creation, motherhood, and scripture. This isn't accidental at all. Neel is setting up the ultimate contrast here. He puts creation right next to destruction. He shows the sacred right next to the profane. Rukmani presents the pure light that Luger was born out of darkness to destroy, or perhaps she is the light he was born out of darkness to protect. Neel never writes violence just for the sake of violence. The character always has a deeply emotional reason for his cruelty. That emotional trauma is exactly what makes the audience root for a guy who does terrible things.
Dystopia is what I'm trying to achieve in a very sane and normal world that we are living in.
And lastly, let's look at the specific environments Neel creates to contain these massive stories. He does not just write normal cities or regular towns, he builds isolated dystopian empires. Narachi in KGF and Khansaar in Salaar share a very similar structural DNA. They are massive, brutal places with their own laws and their own violent mythologies. The regular rules of society simply do not apply in these places. The Indian government has no power there. The police cannot help anyone. Narachi is a massive gold mine built entirely on human slavery and fear. It is surrounded by high walls and guarded by private armies. Khansaar is an ancient walled city-state built on tribal warfare and extreme violence. It is also completely cut off from the outside world. Isolating the characters like this is how Neel creates real stakes. If the hero can just call the police, the movie is over in 10 minutes. By putting them in a place where only the strongest survive, he forces the hero to become a monster. Dragon introduces us to the brutal world of the global opium trade. The story involves the Afghan trading company and the Golden Triangle. This means Luger will be operating in extremely hostile borders and highly dangerous territories. It will be another isolated world. It will feel very much like Khansaar and Narachi, but it will exist on its own terms. This thematic approach is brilliant because it protects the integrity of each individual story and provides the audience a different experience with a different character each time. That is my take on Prashanth Neel's trilogy. What are your theories on this topic? Let me know in the comments below. Subscribe if you haven't already and check out our latest video on Aditya Dhar right here. Thanks for watching and I'll see you in the next one.